Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling 45 Years of Neoliberalism Has Weakened the Ethical Foundations of Democracy and Society. So this episode is kind of a adjunct to the previous one about how the United States is now likely no longer a democracy according to some measures. It's more an anocracy or a mixture of a democratic and undemocratic system, democratic small d. And there's a more general theme that I've been thinking about for many years now, and particularly in thinking about our response to climate change and how various false solutions or ineffective solutions for climate change have been proposed. They've been rejected often as being the worst thing imaginable by the right wing and by climate deniers, but then also they've been only fitfully embraced by the center-left, and meanwhile the issue has sort of been ignored for many years until very recently. But this is there's a more general malaise, let's say, or weakening of our society's foundations that comes from the philosophy of neoliberalism that has essentially become normalized in our society, and it's kind of part of the air that we breathe, even though, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, there were announcements that somehow we had emerged in the response to the pandemic out of neoliberalism, or we had sort of, we were no longer so subject to that philosophy, or that we were somehow coming to the end of the neoliberal era. Also with Donald Trump, too, the emergence of an authoritarian / neo-fascist international, not only in the United States, but in many countries throughout the world, that somehow there wasn't this neoliberal consensus anymore. I mean, so the left has almost always, in some form or other, parts of the actual real left that have been critical of neoliberalism, but that left is pushed to the margins of many societies and has not had an institutional power in many societies. Though, for instance, it's rumored that the recent Chilean government is going to try to combat and displace neoliberalism, at least in that country, or neoliberal institutions. In a way, it would be kind of symbolic and ironic that, or ironic is not the right word, but it would be of great import and very, in a way, very touching if the Chileans led us out of neoliberalism, because the first neoliberal regime was the Pinochet regime in 1973, or he eventually instituted a neoliberal political economy in that country after the coup in 1973. Anyway, neoliberalism, what it's done is it's weakened, in my view, a deontological morality overall. So, and that deontological morality is based in part on law and the perception that laws are just and that laws will be enforced fairly on the powerful as well as on the less powerful. And deontological morality is what we commonly think of as morality. There are sort of three meta-ethical brands, let's say, or not brand, but types. One of them is deontological meta-ethics. One is consequentialist meta-ethics or utilitarianism, and then one is virtue ethics. And so deontological ethics is about rules and about rule following, and that the adherence to rules is of good behavior is what leads to the production of the good, the maintenance of the good. Good people are people who uphold and maintain good rules. So and that produce good outcomes, and so it's based on duty, the idea that one has a duty to uphold this greater good that's expressed through a set of rules, a set of laws. Now, the meta ethics are behind the actual legal system. So, in order to have a functioning legal system, one has to have a strong a conception in the society, a deontological meta ethics that where people recognize that it would be a good idea to follow laws. The laws are basically okay, and even if one is penalized by a law, that it has legitimacy. So, and that legitimacy comes from this cultural acceptance of a deontological meta-ethical system of some description. So there's not a single one. It can be different societies have different rules and different laws and different perceptions of. So there's not a single one set of rules. But anyway, it's the general idea that you have a duty to follow rules. And I, in addition, would add to that, there is, for a democracy and for a society really to be just, you need to have a deontological commitment to truth, to discovering, and that's a foundation to the legal system, but also to society, to political system, to civil society, that one needs a deontological commitment to at least discovering the truth, to a process where one can discover the truth. And among other things, journalism is one of those. Also, science and journalism are two of the areas that, and then also the legal, when it comes to crimes and or accusation or charges of crimes or torts or damages to between people, disputes between people, that principle of a deontological commitment to truth needs to be the all-encompassing standard for then pursuing a particular case or particular or instituting a particular law, or to build a particular institution that is based then on a set of regulations and laws and so forth and so on. So anyway, neoliberalism is the reason why neoliberalism is so toxic to that idea, or that undermines that idea, is because it is essentially committed to, or it is committed to the idea that markets are the zenith, the highest expression of human social organization, and in markets there's no strict deontological commitment to either truth or to laws and to rule following, also to society overall, that one is committed only to one's own maximizing one's own philosophic calculus, one's own utility, one's own wishes and desires, and that is the and every person, it's a postmodern perspective, that everybody is sort of the word is this aggregate of these different people who are just trying to maximize their utilities. And so morality becomes transactional. So every transaction that each party and counterparties view of a particular transaction is all that really matters, and that there's not some overarching opinion about that was a bad or a good transaction. And in some cases, that is liberating. There was before neoliberalism, a set of ethical, moral principles that were not just for certain people. For there was homophobia, there was transphobia, there still is these things. But in Western societies and so forth and so on, there was there's continues to be, though it wasn't often written into laws, there was racism, and there was it's described as systemically. It is there's on the margins, explicitly not in laws, but implicitly, and we are still struggling with that. Among other things, critical race theory looks at how that's inscribed in the law in terms of racism. So anyway, so we didn't have a perfect set of laws or of ethical or ethical principles upon which then the laws were based. So the alternative that neoliberalism offered was saying, well, no, it's going to be all just negotiated out in the tumble of transactions in markets. And so and that was the ideal. Now, the ideal conception of neoliberalism. Now, neoliberalism is a ideology, so it wasn't actually the pure free markets. Never existed. They're also a construct of the state, of governments, of social institutions of various kinds, and so they're embedded in society. They're not this transcendental, abstract, and foundational social institution. They are an institution within larger institutions, and also larger, I would say, also ecosystems and thermodynamic. They are subject to thermodynamic laws, as we all are, and so they're not the foundation of which, unfortunately, neoliberals, who are often trained in neoclassical economics and often think that neoclassical economics somehow trumps. Sorry for the double entendre, but it trumps the reality of science of all. It's the most, they think of neoclassical economics as the basis of everything, and including supplanting natural science. And we have this in the example of William Nordhaus. We have him and how he has essentially screwed up our response to, or helped screw up our response to climate change, in that he made all kinds of neoclassical assumptions that were false about the nature of the climate system and about physics and so forth and so on, that created the basis for the Kyoto protocols, the cap and trade systems, the faulty climate action instruments that have created delay in cutting our emissions and delay in our transition away from a fossil fueled society, and a 30-year delay, basically, or 25-year delay, and which is catastrophic. But anyway, so this deontological, the weakening of deontological commitments, among others, the commitment to truth, and truth includes, of course, discovering scientific laws. It also and also the scientific reality and empirical reality. Anyway, but so in the 45 years ago, or 40 years ago, so forth and so on, there was hope that somehow this kind of letting this new form of social organization and public policy and so forth and so on would solve some of the problems of the previous system of deontological. And I'm rephrasing it, but anyway, the economics was considered to be quote unquote Keynesian. It was some version of Keynesian, and in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s, and anyway, there was inflation in the 70s, and so there was the problem of how to understand that, and how to tamp down inflation, And so, but anyway, so that system fell apart, and it was the opportunity for this neoliberal system was opened up, and so we've had now then that has spread itself throughout our society, and we have the prospect, among other things, of people idealizing business people, including, among others, Donald Trump, but also, Elon Musk, Jamie Dimon, Robert Rubin. These are all extremely influential neoliberals who have, well, no, Donald Trump is a product of neoliberalism, but is himself not an advocate of the neoliberal ideology. But anyway, he's a product, though, of, and certainly his political career is a product of that. Anyway, our commitment to humanity overall, our commitment to our society, to a duty, a sense of duty to doing the right thing, was cast aside in favor of transactional morality. And so we have, in the figures of, for instance, Bill Clinton and then Barack Obama, people who idealized business people, idealized the business world, idealized the financial sector, and also the idea that basically enriching oneself as a politician, and also enriching that simply was the kind of the best you could do to enrich yourself, and that through all kinds of dealing, and also that simply that allowing, quote unquote, markets, which often meant big businesses basically, to take over certain sectors, or to become critical parastatal, to use a fancy word, instances in society, and to rely on them rather than rely on government and government bureaucracies and laws and lawmaking, that leads us to our current situation, where we have a party, in this case the GOP, that is committing crimes and sedition. Essentially, a large portion of that party's leadership is seditionist, and they are there is likely an act of sedition around January 6th, for which they should be ejected from their offices and prosecuted. That we have a paralysis by the government and by the Department of Justice, among other instances, and also the executive branch more generally, in enforcing laws on people who are part of the elite, because there is a wholesale rejection. It's not only, I mean, some people say, and it's true, that that it's part of a kind of a group, a club, that they're afraid of prosecuting anyone and punishing anyone in the club, and that's true. That's the way it works out. But more generally, that's accepted in society overall, because we all have, in some sense, internalized the neoliberal calculus, that we can't conceive of a rule of law being enforced on powerful people, and it's only used differentially as an instrument of power and oppression on poor people, or powerless people, often people of color, or protesters of the left wing, and so, or people who are, in other words, people with a conception of the good that I share and that other people and most people should share, but somehow we're kind of allowing these injustices to happen, because we have just allowed this kind of play of transactional morality, and simply saying, well, just allowing and we saw this, for instance, in Nancy Pelosi's, you know, endorsement of stock trading by politicians. Is that that's a perfect expression of this neoliberal morality, and she doesn't understand why one would be opposed to that, and why one would you know, she's now backed down from that because basically the younger members of the Democratic Party, including some centrist ones like John Ossoff, have realized that it's like, this is politically toxic for us. That there is a conception somewhere that people have that, wait a minute, politicians are supposed to serve us. They're not supposed to use their power to enrich themselves. And so there is some people do have a sense somewhere of a deontological, a duty-based commitment that someone has to have, and that politicians should have. But there are very few political vehicles for expressing that, and it's considered to still be something of an outlier and something of a left-wing thing. Now, just on the right wing, or the far right, or the Trumpist right wing, he has also he is recognized the deficits of neoliberalism intuitively, or parts of that, but they have decided instead they would create a sort of a patronage system where the strong man, Trump or someone else, would be the protector, and that's the alternative that they're proposing in a way, and or at least that's what many of the base of the right wing is also. Essentially, it's a neo-royalist in some ways or another. It's an idea that there's the big protector, the big man or big woman, but most often it's the big man who is a charismatic, quote unquote charismatic figure, who is through their personal magnetism, their personal magic, is going to protect. It's not based on laws, not based on a sense of duty, but a sense of, you know, love. Okay, for, again, a select group of the population. It is almost always a racist, and this idea of this sort of patron, the patron or the patronage system that they want to institute. So anyway, I am just sketching this out here because I think we need to return to some system of deontological morality, and the sense of that people have duty to each other, and duty to society, and duty to discover and follow good rules and have them instituted in the laws of our society. And it's not a mindless following of laws. One can use one's mind to propose new ones, but there's a process for doing that, and we should make that process more streamlined and less corrupt, and so forth and so on, less controlled by big money, and more democratic. So in fact, you know, we have to optimize that as much as possible, but the way to that is blocked, among other things. And the powerful are also, and including the corporate elite, are against this idea, or at least many of them are against. And now some enlightened, not all business people are this way, and not all rich people and so forth and so on are this way, but they realize that we do need a system that is fundamentally a structure that has fundamental commitment to this deontological morality. That we need a stronger sense of rule of law, and also of renovation of our legal system, and a progressive, to readjust our 245-year-old system to the modern era and to the challenges we face. But it takes a lot of thinking, and it's also not something that is discussed enough and is openly discussed enough. So anyway, I'm opening this up here, and I probably will return to this in future videos. So anyway, please share any comments and thoughts you have in below, and also if you're liking Politics 2100 more generally, please subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.